So now our next speaker is Dharmajit Sarangi, Director, Global Technology Operations and Service Delivery, and he's from Alshaya, and he'll be speaking on the topic maximizing your ROI from RPA. Over to you, Mr. Dharmajit.
Thank you, Maninder. Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for giving me an opportunity to share my perspectives in this session and maybe learn from each other. I'm sure there's been a lot of engagement and a lot of interesting sessions so far that hopefully all of us have been able to take away from. Can you please confirm that you are able to see my shared screen?
Sure. Yes, I can see your screen.
Thank you. Just give me a minute. Yeah. So, as the topic is maximizing your ROI from RPA, and I'm sure a lot of us during our journey in the RPA and intelligent process automation world have always come across with the challenge of ROI. How do we articulate it? How do we measure it? How do we keep it real? How do we use it to also bring in additional investments and get a sense of the return or the bang for the buck, as they say, and return on our investments? So this is what we will talk about, and I'll take you through some of my perspectives, learnings, and case studies. A little bit about myself. I look after global technology and operations for the Alshaya group. We are a Middle East based retailer. We franchise around 90 plus brands in the different sectors, lifestyle, hospitality, pharmaceuticals, health and beauty, etc. And our journey in the intelligent process automation was through a center of excellence approach. So we started about a couple of years ago, building up a team from scratch. We started using the state of the art technologies and platforms at the time. And with the center of excellence approach, built up a number of reusable artifacts, standards, and frameworks that we use today in order to power our IPA journey. And throughout this entire process, return on investment and returns of all bots that we've been able to implement have been a very important aspect of measuring our success, among other areas. ROI has been a very important guiding factor of how we measure our success during this journey. So in the agenda today, we'll look at these 5 areas. I'll talk about the automation cycle in brief, and how do we focus on opportunities to maximize automation ROI through that cycle? What kinds of tools and methodologies we use in order to achieve maximum ROI? Certain key impediments, things that come in the way in terms of realizing or articulating or measuring the return on investment. And we'll wrap it up with a case study that I'll take you through in terms of how we applied these learnings into a real case in order to achieve the maximum benefits from the automation opportunity. Yeah, so this is what we'll cover. So moving on, the process automation lifecycle. So to kind of take a bit of a step back to understand how it is that we address automation, and this is one way of looking at it from an overall lifecycle perspective, that you start with an opportunity assessment, identify the right opportunities as part of that assessment process, which is backed by a cost benefit analysis. It then allows you to filter and prioritize the best opportunities that will give you the maximum bang for the buck. Once having done that, then you go into a sort of a functional and technical feasibility analysis to understand how it is that we will achieve that automation in terms of technical feasibility. As we progress and refine this, we go into the solution designing as needed, or in most cases these days with low code and no code, the solution design and development are compressed into short cycles with very limited upfront coding involved, but these are aspects that are also part of the overall life cycle. Take it through into a demo, show and tell way of user acceptance, when these scenarios are run on live with real data, move it into production and ongoing operations. And lastly, hand over for adoption, right? So this is the life cycle that we employ, and we will understand a little more in terms of how this life cycle lends itself to automation benefits and maximizing return on investment for the automation. When we went through this life cycle, right, our learning has been along 5 broad elements that help us to achieve best ROI and maximize the return on investment. Right. So I'll cover this as part of this journey. The first one is what I call awareness. Right. So awareness is really about understanding what is the opportunity out there. And a lot of upfront work needs to be done in this stage to be able to pick the right candidates, right? To be able to lead to the next, which is picking the right candidates. But in the awareness phase, we start out almost on a blank sheet. That's our experience, that we start out on a blank sheet. We put in all kinds of opportunities, both quick wins and more complex ones. We look at past references and past case studies of attempts to do the same thing before and what it has led to. This is also an area where one can employ new technologies such as process mining so as to unearth or harvest a bag of opportunities, right, which is the first stage in terms of building awareness of the art of the possible. So in this session, there is a lot of conversations, a lot of dialogue that happens with the business users who are the ultimate consumers of the automation. A lot of this happens over workshops, over demos, over one of the tools that we've used is something we call a hackathon. And it's a hackathon version, which we call, botathon, which is a way to get the users to express their pain points and thereby come up with the opportunities initially and build the awareness on the opportunity. So that's the first stage. As we progress through that journey, we use a certain set of criteria or filters in order to assess the right and pick the right candidate. So the second important aspect of this journey is picking the right candidates. Now this is a tricky one, right? So, and depending on what are the drivers and at what stage of the automation maturity model your organization is, you will be able to understand which candidates will give you the maximum return on investment, right? And when I say return on investment, I'll talk a bit in more detail. It is not just the financial elements, but taken in a holistic view. What is the best return for the buck? So this could be directly into productivity gains. It could be due to cost of quality. It could be employee morale. It could be revenue uptick. There could be a host of factors. But in terms of the investment we put in versus what we get back, we stack rank these in terms of order of priority so that we pick the right candidates. And the right candidates may not always be quick wins. In the initial stage of our journey, we focused on quick wins. And while it was good to start and good to build up a center of excellence, my experience has been that the tendency is that you settle down there into quick wins as a comfort zone and you don't actually stretch yourself into more complex and high value use cases, right? So picking the right candidates is a balancing act between quick wins as well as complex scenarios that get more value back into the automation and value back to the business. As we move on further, it's next about choosing the right platform. So what do I mean by this? So not all scenarios and not all candidates need very complex automation platforms. Some of them are straight away lend themselves to basic scripting. Things like Python, for example, can be used. Others need more complex workflow orchestration and a RPA platform. Yet others can be only realized by implementing some of the more advanced AI ML based intelligent process automation capabilities, right? So, but choosing the right platform means not over engineering it and therefore not overspending pick the right platform for the right candidate or the right problem statement. Yeah, so that's the third element of choosing the right platform. And once we've done this, we start to get into the solutioning mode where it's all about team and time. Yeah, so by that, what I mean is the right team, and this is very crucial because it's not only RPA teams or IPA teams that are involved. Very importantly, it is direct sponsorship and support by the users, right? So the users, so the users need to be part of, the consumers need to be part of this team and time model, where the right amount of investment is made upfront during the process of solutioning, so as to not spend time downstream, where there may be a surprise or a negative surprise in terms of what the automation is yielding versus what the expectation was, right? And what we've seen is this lends itself very well to agile models that bring everyone together and knock off the automation typically in 2 to 3 weeks time, one sprint of work, and the automation is ready. It can always be iteratively developed, but essentially the core aspect of the minimum viable product is ready within 2 to 3 weeks typically, right? So that is the team and time. And the last thing is the utilization, right? So after all of this is done, and you hand over the bot for use, it is very important to continue to track and champion the utilization. So we have champions within the business teams who essentially adopt the bot, right? So adopting the bot meaning owning it, ensuring it is utilized, answering any questions people might have, dealing with some teething troubles, dealing with the change element, right? The change aspect of moving away from the manual way of doing it into a efficient and automated framework. So it does involve handling the change, and it does also involve tracking the benefits which we said we expect right at the start of the journey as part of the picking the right candidates. When we say that these are the candidates, we also assess what is the estimated benefit at that stage, and the utilization will be the actual benefit. So we compare the two, right? So this is how we look at a journey that has got ROI tracking and ROI awareness as part of an integrated with the entire life cycle, as opposed to it being sometimes only at the start and forgotten at the end, or sometimes taken much later, much after a lot of automation has already been completed and delivered, right? So this is what I believe is the way a model that helps you achieve maximization of your return on investment. This is an element of ROI that I wanted to talk a little bit more about. So typically the conversations I've been in have involved ROI from an holistic standpoint, right? So ROI is not just financial, and that's why I like to use the iceberg analogy here. What is the visible and what is the invisible, or the tangible and the intangibles, right? So many times the tangibles are just like an iceberg, just the tip of it, and the intangibles that come beneath are quite significant and are not so easy to articulate. For example, some of the tangibles what we have used is things like productivity gains in terms of hours saved, digital workforce equivalent. What does that translate to in terms of a digital workforce equivalent that we've been able to develop and deploy? And then the cost savings itself, the direct and indirect costs that are coming in from these productivity gains and redeployment of resource, and redeployment of people into higher value add opportunities. Then how do we track it? So one of the important tracking KPIs, parameters we use, is a straight throughput of the process. The more the process runs in a unattended and without any intervention, the more efficient it is and the more the ROI. So therefore, our focus is always to push the STP to as close as 100% as we can, right? And then the feedback process. So going into the journey which we spoke of earlier, the ROI tracker is kept up to date and signed off at the adoption phase at the end as well, where we actually get the business to tie up the numbers and sign up to them, and then achieve the business case or identify a gap that can be taken into the next cycle. So These are some of the tangible ways in terms of how we measure the ROI. Some of the intangible ways, which are also equally important and that we also include into the conversation on ROI, are things like the software aspects, right? So we qualify the software aspects. What are some of those important software aspects that we have seen? In terms of my experience with our journey in IPA, one of the first things is employee morale. So quite clearly, in several cases, and we have the business users, the consumers talk about it, how this particular automation has helped them to get rid of the drudgery or the monotony of certain activities that they were conducting in a time consuming and error prone manner, right? So they've been freed up to do more interesting work and to actually start to add value as per their core competency. So employee morale, redeployment of the resource or the bandwidth. One other area is brand image, right? It's a very crucial aspect that is not easily understood initially because it is hidden underneath what I would call the cost of error or defect. So many of the processes that we employ automation for are error prone. One of the aspects is that because they are manual, tendency for it to be inconsistent, non-standard, and therefore more defect, more errors. And some of these errors have a direct impact on the brand. Now, as an organization, Alshaya, we retail 90 plus brands, so we speak our brands through our brands. Our brands speak about us, right? So we are our brand, and therefore brand image is very crucial for us to be able to protect in terms of cost of the error or defect, right? So, for example, let's say we have a particular brand is with very wants to highlight the fine dining experience, as part of which we also bring in certain types of experiences, some of which need to be manually put together. And if these are non-standard and inconsistent, then it directly impacts the experience to our end customers, right? So we bring in automation to kind of stitch it together, which is great, and we bring in the productivity gains, the tangibles on the left side. But what we have also indirectly benefited is the intangible aspect of the brand image itself, right? So these are elements where we qualify them, right? So we qualify these elements. We also ascribe. When I say ascribe, we start to evaluate certain factors, right? So some of the ones above, we evaluate them by giving enterprise values to certain soft elements. For example, cost of a dissatisfied customer or a demotivated employee, right? We ascribe this. We make an attempt to do so, and in one or two cases, we've been able to bring very useful values to some of these factors, again in conversation with the end business who are consuming the automation, right? So it's important to make this attempt, because if we don't, then it stays to be hidden. So this is an attempt to bring the hidden part out and therefore further qualify and correctly articulate your ROI, right? And both of these two then again go into the feedback mechanism. So they are updated into the same return on invest tracker. And the business case is said to be achieved when both the tangibles and the intangibles are put together, right? One is not given more weightage over the other. So this is the way, as a team, as an organization, right, together with the consumers of the automation, we are saying we set out to achieve something. These were the benefits, the tangibles, these were the intangibles. We put the factors all together, and therefore we are saying that the return on investment is this much. This is the track of how we've achieved it, and whether we've achieved the business case or there is a gap that needs to be fed back into the automation life cycle, right? So this model helps us to take a holistic view, number one, and also articulate correctly the ROI, because most of the time the challenge is the ROI is understated. We just focus on productivity gains, we just focus on cost savings, then it is a gross understatement of the ROI. When we bring it up like this together, then suddenly it makes far more sense, right, in terms of the power of what we are doing, as well as defining which ones we will take up in future, what are the candidates. So it's a complete integrated cycle. Yeah. Tools and methodologies, I think some of these we've spoken of in earlier sessions. The earlier speakers talking about hyper automation platforms. These are good ways to stitch it all together. We've been using process modeling, mining, and discovery tools in order to unearth opportunities. We've been also using AI ML for certain use cases that require more complex, use cases. And underlying all of this is agile. So we do it in a very integrated way, very closely with the consumers, and make them part of the journey and make them own and refine the automation on an ongoing continuous improvement cycle. Yeah, so we spoke of this. It's the agile development standard model. We run through this quickly, decide it's ready to go into production, into release, and then continuous improvement and the subsequent iterations of the automation. Well, talk about a few impediments that come in the way in this journey, right? So some of them have a direct impact, and others have a more indirect impact into the ROI. Right? Some of the direct impact that hits the ROI that can be realized from the automation are mismatch of expectations, right? The business expects or the consumers expect a certain type of outcome, and those expectations are not clarified, and therefore confusion and ambiguity leads to when the end result is seen. Then many times not understanding the end-to-end process itself, not quite clear about how the process needs to look like, how it looks today, right? And therefore not addressing the right steps in the process and not addressing it holistically end-to-end. So end-to-end view. Quality of the test data. I mean, because this is a process that is manual, therefore the test data that needs to be built up also is typically manual across spreadsheets, across file stores or database, etc., etc. So, but to bring it all together, the test data quality is very important. Poor opportunity assessment. So this is at the start of the journey or during the course of the automation life cycle that we do not actually keep sight of. We don't pick the right opportunities. I was speaking earlier about going too much for quick wins. Right? That's a way of kind of undersizing and underinvesting your automation bandwidth. And lastly, adoption discipline. So while it's all great to have an automation out there, how well it is adopted and how it is kept up to date and live and being part of day-to-day operations is equally important as building it, designing it, and refining it. So these are some of the important impediments to keep sight of and to take note of, so that during the life cycle these are addressed where as needed. Some of the other areas that I've seen in terms of which have slightly more delayed or indirect impact into ROI realization are things like the catch up, the IT catch up cycle with IPA and RPA, right? So certain cases where we, as part of assessing, as part of the criteria to assess the opportunity, we also look at, is it a short term tactical solution versus a long term? Is there something that is coming by way of digital or by way of IT itself, enterprise IT, to address this need? And if that is not done correctly, then very soon we will look at obsolescence of automation that we put together, right? So IT catch up. ROI understated. I spoke of this earlier due to intangibles. It's got an indirect impact, a significant indirect impact. Environmental factors and risks. One of the biggest ones that immediately hit us was COVID-19 when we designed a set of automation in 2019. Late 2019, it went live, and then immediately the process was invalidated because we had to simply go remotely. We were not coming to the office together anymore, and there were a lot of other constraints in terms of how the process had to be operated. So these are some factors and risks that need to be taken into account. Attended automation, any automation that requires some degree of human attention or support for the process will have an indirect impact on the ROI. So avoid as much as feasible or keep it down to the minimum. Also look at your STP to make sure that attended automation is minimized or eliminated. And lastly, bot proliferation. Yeah. So one of the things that I just wanted to highlight here is to keep sight of bots that they don't proliferate all over. Right. So proliferation means that there is duplication. There are far too many bots. There is a big overhead in managing them, and there is also big impact of any small change on the entire set of bots. Right. So therefore, they start to get impacted and stop working. Right. So that part is also something to be kept sight of. that we've got the right bots, the right numbers for the right reasons, right? So we don't just proliferate just for the sake of automation. Yeah. So these are some key impediments that I've encountered in my journey through the IPA space, and it acts as a good checklist in terms of through the life cycle to watch out for. Yeah. I'll conclude with this slide, which is a case study that takes you through some of these things that we discussed. This was an internal requirement where for an online marketplace, there was lack of visibility to the stock. By the stock systems and inventory systems managed through enterprise IT systems did not provide an omni-channel or one view to consuming channels such as the online marketplace or the website, etc., etc. This specifically was for an online marketplace scenario, right? And the problem statement was the online marketplace didn't have visibility to stock levels to be able to allocate correctly and take advantage of the efficiencies of a single consolidated supply chain, right? So we have one supply chain. I want to leverage that. I want to be able to fulfill my stores. I want to be able to fulfill my website. I want to also be able to share the products on the online marketplace. So on an online marketplace, it came with a whole set of complex business rules in terms of stock visibility and requirements, and therefore what kind of stock to be made available to the online marketplace consumers, right? So this was being done manually. A lot of data was collected from various sources. A lot of massaging of that data and processing on Excel sheets, and then some manual inputs and decision making was done, and finally it was loaded onto the online marketplace, right? So we had to deal with unstructured format, distributed across various systems, non-standardized manual activities, right, and consolidation, and finally uploads, right? So this is the problem statement that presented itself, and the solution we took stock of from an IPA and RPA standpoint was to bring it together firstly with the process, and secondly use IPA to do a correlation with the demand, right? So now extending the use case and saying, look, this is the demand. We correlate that using intelligent process models, right? Using some of the demand forecasting, etc., to be able to fulfill more effectively. So as to get the right overlay of intelligence on top of the basic stock visibility, and therefore provide a better stock allocation to the online marketplace, right? So what this has led to is more accuracy in terms of stock positions for omnichannel retail and less stock outs. So as a retailer, an important criteria that we measure ourselves is stock outs. The customer comes to our store or to the web channel or any channel. We don't want to send him or her back unhappy because we don't have what he is looking for, right? So these were some of the things, and of course the rework rate. And when we actually measured, right, we again took it tangibles, intangibles. So in terms of tangibles, 7 million data processes were transacted successfully on a monthly basis, 100% accuracy in all of them. We saved 360 hours, 80% reduction in manual efforts, right? It came down from 12 hours to 45 minutes, and we've translated this into costs directly, right? 90% reduction of transaction processing time. So therefore, we have shrunk the cycle, right? So these are easy to kind of tangibles. These are easy tangibles that one can articulate. Some of the intangibles, we put in a percentage of revenue growth because of lost sales opportunity. We ascribed a value to that and arrived at a number that was accepted by the users as an initial starting point. We refined the model, right? We made a start there. Improve stock visibility. This is coming as feedback from the users. So we're tracking feedback and intangible. Employee morale, and this is again by feedback from the same team in terms of this is how it has helped make my own job very interesting, more interesting, and I can look at other things, right? So we've captured that as part of feedback, and therefore we have the intangibles and the tangibles together to present back as a business case. So this hopefully gives you an idea how to go about essentially a journey that will maximize your ROI, both in the way you measure it, track it, and articulate it. Yeah. So with that, I come to the end of my presentation. If you have any comments, questions, happy to take them, or feel free to reach me at the email address on the screen, and we can stay in touch.
Thank you, Mr. Dharmajit. So now as we are in our QA session, so you may ask your queries.
Am I audible?
Yes.
Okay. So Dharmjit, just a quick question on the intangible benefits, right? What is the best way to present the intangible benefits to the senior management? Because I'm sure when the sponsors and all, they look at us, right? And then we, they say, hey, give me a report of last 6 months, 1 year or whatever. How is the RPA automation is helping my business, right? So it's very easy to draw the tangible benefits data, but how best we should represent the intangible benefits?
Great question, Ranjan. It was one of the big challenges we faced as well. My personal experience, Ranjan, is that the best way to articulate it is let the people speak for themselves, right? So testimonial. As part of when you go live and have implemented bots, we go out there and talk to people, right? So and not purposely not focus on the productivity savings, but ask them the questions and have them speak up in terms of how it has helped make their jobs better and richer, right? And those testimonials, those same sound bites, maybe those conversations, right? If we bring it into the articulation process, and when we speak and go, when we talk to higher management for more funds and more business case review sessions, that's when we bring in those testimonials to have the people speak themselves ideally, or present it in a format like a presentation with those testimonials being backed by the people, the adopters of that automation, right? So this way makes it a far more compelling story. Otherwise, without the people and without the human aspect, it tends to get completely, into an analytical and number story, which is far more boring. What we've seen is we've got one or two instances where people speak about it themselves or give us the testimonial for us to share back. That's the way I found to be the most effective.
All right. Thank you, Dharmjit.
All right. If there is anything, feel free to reach out to my email address, which is on the screen, and I can take those questions offline as well. So on that note, thank you so much. Glad to be part of this summit, and wish you all the best in your automation journey, and continue to stay safe, you and your families. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dharmjit. Thank you for your valuable time.